our program this afternoon is we're going to be hearing from two candidates who are running for the 32nd Legislative District, which is right here. I don't happen to live in it, but many people here do. So the candidates are our incumbent MARALYN Chase and challenger Jesse Salomon. And the format, I just wanted to go over the format of this. What we're going to do is we're going to give them anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes for each person to sort of make their introductory remarks. And we've been told that maybe actually 10 minutes is too much. So if it's 5, that's completely fine. But we want each person to be able to kind of speak for their time, and then we're going to go to the next person. They'll do their time, and then what we're going to open it up is to questions. And we have a mic that we'll be bringing around. We ask that you put a little bit of thought into your questions, not have the question be 5 minutes long, because we want to get a bunch of questions in. We're going to have roughly 20 minutes, maybe a little more depending if the opening statements are shorter. Roughly 20 minutes of Q&A, so we'd like roughly 2 minutes a question to kind of get through. But yeah, just don't make questions a novel because it's hard for everyone to remember and sometimes to answer. So with that, we did a coin toss, and we have Jesse Salomon who's going to be coming up first. And just a few things, and this is just a brief introduction. Jesse lives here in the area, obviously. He attended, got a bachelor's from Western Washington University, has a JD from the University of Washington. He's been an attorney in the area for 13 years, much of, or all of it, doing public defense work.
And child welfare.
And child welfare. He is a member of the King County Child Care Youth Advisory Committee, as well as the King County Law, Safety, and Justice Committee. He has been particularly an advocate around mental health and addiction issues, at-risk youth. He's been an intern with the AFL-CIO. He also has interests in transportation, environment, housing. Go.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say how amazing the Indivisible group is. After Donald Trump was elected, none of us, I'm sure, could believe it. I was on a plane at 5 p.m., and I was pretty confident what the outcome was going to be. All right, weren't we all? And I started getting sick to my stomach getting on that plane, and that made me nervous. I said, am I picking something up here? And I sat down. I was looking out the window. A lady sat down next to me, and I said, gosh, I sure hope this election goes the right way. And she goes, yeah, if we don't win, we're going to have a revolution. And I turned to her, and she had a Make America Great Again hat, and I said, oh my goodness. So for 3 hours, while the election results were coming in, we were in the air, no updates. And I didn't want to rub it in, the fact that Hillary Clinton was going to win. So I just listened, for 3 hours. And actually we had a great conversation. And I think I was able to explain some things like what a liberal interpretation of a case is and why that might be fair. And I thought, that we made a good connection there. Then when we landed, it was, oh my God, right? So I got on a boat as soon as the next day because I was going to go on a ship for another 7 days. Also no information. So I got home, and that's when it really hit me. Like, I don't know what our country is going to be like right now. We have a president who's against the rule of law, and I don't know where we're going. Out of the ashes of that came people like yourselves, right, who are resisting Donald Trump and resisting that impending fascism, and I think it's heroic, and I appreciate it. That's also why I'm so active. I think we need to not just resist, but advance a positive agenda. Speaking of that, does anybody know why I have this orange ribbon on? Gun responsibility.
Thank you.
Hunters wear orange to keep themselves safe. And apparently, that's all we can do nowadays to keep ourselves safe. But we don't know if that's going to work. So we need to take some responsible, reasonable, common sense gun control legislation. I'm ready to work on that. I'm sorry the legislature has not passed the full gamut of what we need to do, but I want to bring some new energy and effective leadership to that. A little bit about me. My great-grandfather was an immigrant from Russia, came to New York City, in Manhattan. He lived in a tenement, very poor area, very small apartment, shared it with his kids, 13 brothers and sisters my grandfather had. My great-grandfather was a labor organizer, and he organized sweatshops. This was before collective bargaining. My grandfather and my mother grew up in that same poor neighborhood in the projects and tenement housing. But because of free and reduced cost college, my mother was the first in her family to go. And because of that, I was privileged to have been born relatively comfortable in the middle class. We moved out here, and I recognize that. That's why I'm a big supporter of unions. I've been a union member, SEIU 925. And as a public defender, I've helped people who have been charged with crimes who can't afford their own defense. And we've stood up for the Constitution, and we've stood up to power to make sure that they have good representation, and I'm proud of that. Before that, I worked for the Native American tribe, the Lummi Nation, as a child welfare attorney. So when children were abused and we had to go to court to either put them in foster care or put them in custody of a family member, I would do that. That is not an easy job, but my sympathy always goes towards the kids, not myself, of course. I've been involved in Democratic politics for, decade and a half, 2 decades. In 2004, I was a delegate to the Democratic National Convention on behalf of Howard Dean. I was not satisfied with the status quo in the Democratic Party. I was upset with the fact that George Bush was elected and we were heading towards a war in Iraq where the Democrats were not standing up and they were just letting it happen. And so he was the first one that I felt gave voice to my concern. So I became a delegate, and unfortunately he didn't win, but he became the Democratic National Committee chair and implemented a 50-state strategy to compete everywhere. Unfortunately, I don't know why, but other people took over the Democratic Party and now kind of pulled back on that. And again, we see how we lose, right, over time if we're not invested in this 50-state strategy. Again, you are invested in the campaigns that matter. Here, for this election, we have to take the Congress back, and I thank your support for that. In terms of what I want to do here in the legislature, early childhood education is a high priority for me because when I worked with adults in the system, frankly, a lot of them were well down the path of drug addiction, homelessness, mental health issues. And while I tried to make a difference, I feel like it's a lot harder to do that than if you start with kids from birth to 5 on who are facing challenges and disadvantages. And so it's unfortunate to me that the legislature, although they've stepped up somewhat, they have not fully invested in high-quality early childhood education. And that's what I want to do. And that's what I've been working on as a member of the Children and Youth Advisory Board with King County. We spend resources and money to promote resiliency in youth. And we have a demographic focus, so we understand that minority youth are overrepresented in the penal system, and so we're trying to stop the school-to-prison pipeline by changing disciplinary practices and by having trauma-informed discipline in schools. So when kids get in trouble, it's not just about kicking them out of school. It's about what is going on with you, how can we work with you to bring you back into the fold. And that's going to lead to a lot better outcomes. Here in Shoreline, I didn't just come to this issue, right? Here in Shoreline, I've been working on it. The amount of time a mother and a father get to spend with their child is critical for their early development. And the more you're struggling to get by, and the more jobs you have to weave together, the harder it is for you to spend that time together. So I sponsored and passed, through the City Council, paid family and medical leave for certain Shoreline residents. And then I am happy that Washington State stepped up and passed it for the state as a whole. I don't think it's good enough or generous enough, and I want to continue to work on that in the legislature. I'm the proud father of a year and a half year old child, And when I think about the future of climate change, it really scares me. And when I tell people at the door, I'm a politician who believes in science, and I'm sorry we've come to the point where I have to stay it, where it's a question, but that's where we're at. And I follow data. That's what drives my policies is data, because it makes for good investments and it's the right thing to do. We need to double down on clean energy infrastructure, right? We should have done this 40 years ago. We should stop the lie that this is not happening. Climate change is real and it's happening. And so what I want to do is invest in research and development and tax breaks to get that going. We talk about gas stations. I mean, we have gas stations. We don't talk about electric stations. Why don't we have that? Why don't we make it easier to drive electric vehicles? Why don't we have something like a battery swap out or a super quick charging station? We can do this. We sent people to the moon. We can save ourselves, and that's frankly what's at stake. I've been running out of time. About a minute left?
A little over a minute.
Okay, thank you.
It's hard.
You know, unfortunately, the legislature has been relying on property taxes as a revenue source instead of more progressive taxes, instead of closing the hundreds of tax loopholes for things like martial arts studios. They did close a tax break for bottled water companies. That's good. But at the same time, they opened more tax loopholes. So we can't have that. I want you to know that I'm committed to open and transparent government. Here in Shoreline, our records are public. So anything I email to another council member, put in writing about an issue that we're facing, you can ask for that. We have staff members who will get you that information. We keep it, we retain it. When a judge said that the legislature has to also obey that same rule, the legislature, and unfortunately my opponent, voted against it. And so I want to bring open and transparent government down to Olympia. I'm wrapping up here. I just want to let you know who some of my endorsers are. Ruth Kagi, she's the sitting Democratic state representative here in this district. Representative Judy Cliburn, Democrat, state representative, chair of the House Transportation Committee. 4 current and former mayors of Shoreline. Nicola Smith, who's the mayor of Linwood. Council members, Susan Chang, Pacific Northwest Iron Workers, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, 191, Iron Workers, Local 86. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I guess it's not so bad. Great. It's really hard to talk within those time frames, I know. All right, our next speaker is going to be MARALYN Chase. MARALYN Chase is the current Washington State Senator for the 32nd, sorry, guess who goes where, legislative district, and she has been in this position, no, I hate this. She has been in this position for 7 years, am I correct on that, 2011? Yeah. Prior to that, she was in the Washington State House of Representatives for the same district for 9 years. I don't know what she majored in at UW, but she has taught political science and social theory at UW. She has been an entrepreneur running a contracting business in the area for 25 years, family business, I believe. Her main areas, well, many, but sustainability, justice, fairness, the golden rule. She is the new Democratic chair of the Senate Economic Development and International Trade Committee, and she has worked with the Seattle Urban League for housing and homelessness issues, and I'm probably missing a few.
You are, but that's okay.
Okay. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming out here today, too. This is our first debate of the campaign season, so it's going to be kind of fun, I think. You know, I want you to know, I did study political economy, social theory, critical social theory, actually, at the university, and I was an instructor. While I was writing my dissertation, which I decided I got what I wanted and quit. Shouldn't have done that, but I did it. You know? And it was all really good. So Reagan got into office, and I thought, what in the world are we going to do? I worked for a while at the Urban League, and we had homeless problems and we still have homeless problems. And it was a little thing called Operation Equality. So I said, okay, one of the things I did down there was learn how to do contracting. I thought, I'll put up my shingle and become a contractor. And I was a successful contractor for 25 years with my daughter. And it made a good living. It was good. After that, I ran for the legislature. I served in the House for 8 years, I guess it was, and then moved to the Senate. And in the Senate, as you heard, I'm the new Democratic chair of the Economic Development and International Trade Committee. I'm also, I'll go back to that in just a second, but I'm also the co-chair of the Railroad Caucus. We're trying to figure out how to move people through, distances. Where do they need to go, and how can we do that? And while I'm a big supporter of electric vehicles, just so you know, and that certainly will help the pollution issue, but it doesn't answer the congestion issue. So if we think that having more electric recharge stations, which I've been voting for, we're trying to electrify the main corridors. It helps at least to get people into electric cars. But we have not yet solved the pollution or the congestion. And that's, every time I have to drive down I-5, it's just a killer. It's really hard. But when you think about what we really did in the legislature this year, in 60 days, we conducted the people's business and we got out on time, within budget. And it was really good. It was good. But we only can consider that kind of a down payment on hope. Because while we did wonderful things, we passed, after 73 years, a bill to give women a pathway to equal employment, equal pay. And the ability, another bill, to be able to ask how much these guys are making compared to what I get. Because in the past you could get fired for asking what anybody got paid. That's why that's one of the reasons women were paid so much less. We passed reproductive parity for women. It took, we've been working on that for 7 years. 6 years, I think it was. It's hard, to pass progressive legislation when you don't have the majority. You have to have the majority. And we had 5 years of pent-up energy, and everybody had their bucket list of bills. And we wanted to be able to pass all of them. Everybody wanted to pass every single bill that they had been saving up. Well, we couldn't. But we're going to go back and we're going to do it again. And because all of the things that we know our constituents want to have passed as public policy, we know we're not finished yet. But you'll be happy to know we were sending out bills. We passed about 300 bills. And we were whipping those things through at 6 minutes a bill. So you probably, if you were watching on TVW, say, why don't those senators debate more? Because we knew if we debated, or if we got up and engaged the Republicans in vigorous debate, it would take away time from bills we were trying to get passed. So they're still there. We all intend to fully pass some more. We're going to do wonderful, wonderful things. First of all, we're celebrating the return of science. It is refreshing, to say the least, that we now have evidence-based policies. At least we're not on everything yet, but we're getting there. We're getting there. One of the things that we're very conscious of is that by our public policy, we can cause danger to people. And when you say, well, what am I talking about? I will tell you that by our tax policies, we are creating homelessness. And it is time, I think, that we step up to that responsibility. Because if we continue to raise property taxes for any number of reasons, whether it's a rezone or whether it's just to build a new swimming pool or sidewalks or all of those things. If you keep adding the property taxes up, people who did everything right in their lives, they saved their money, they planned for their retirement, they didn't plan on the property taxes going like that. And even if they got their half, what do they call it, their safety net for senior property taxes, they're having right now to make a decision between food and medicine or taxes. We had this in our country one time before, well, probably more than once. But in the 30s, the farmers were carrying the majority of the property tax. They only accounted for 30% of the population, but they were paying about 70% of the taxes. And so they're trying to figure out what can we do to stop this, because we are losing our farms. We're losing the farm, and what that the state would give a farmer 5 years. You could get in arrears on your taxes for 5 years, and then if you couldn't pay them, the state would foreclose. So if you look at a map where you see where the state owns property, you see a lot of scattered sites. That's because the state had to foreclose because they didn't pay their property taxes. One of the reasons they didn't pay their property tax was because there was a recession in this state in 1927. Now this is before the stock market crash. And so people were already hurting. And then when they lost their market, they had no revenue. People were exporting hops. They were exporting wheat, all kinds of things. It was a thriving international market. And when they lost the market, they lost their income. And they lost the houses. Today, it's more, they just get hit with the property tax, the increases in the utility taxes, and all of those, they don't have enough money. They just simply do not have enough money. So people say, well, why don't you just sell your house, Look, it's worth so much more than when you bought it. It's true. It's very true. But there's no place for them to move to. There's just no place. So we're working on trying to solve some of those issues. You'll be happy to know. Those railroad shipping containers, 40 feet? You can put those together. And there's a company now that says, I can solve the homeless problem. We can put these together in 7 days. Can you imagine what we could do with all of these vacant, shipping containers and all of that state land that we own? There are solutions that we can have. And let me just say, we do not have to have high property taxes. We do not have to. We could have tax reform, and we're working very hard on getting tax reform. We do not have to have property tax as the foundation for getting revenue for schools or for trying to support local governments. Although I will say, local government exempts most of the property taxes. So they don't have, the people who are still paying in the property tax are really getting hit hard. We're working on that. So I will be happy to answer your questions. I'm a policy wonk. I spend a lot of time trying to understand these policies and what we can do. And I'd like to refer you, I think on your chair, you will find a brochure that will cover some of the questions you may have. I'm happy to note that last night I got the sole endorsement of the State Labor Council. Yeah. I'm a labor legislator. And then today I got the sole endorsement of Snohomish County Democrats. So I'm really very pleased. Anyway, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I really like to talk policy. So have at it. Well, I'll stay up here. Does anybody have a question?
Hold on, we're gonna do that. Okay, so kind of what we're thinking about doing. I'm sorry, we're in the world of only so much AV equipment. So what I think we'll do is put a couple of chairs up there with the big microphone between you. You can either both sit or both stand, whatever works, put the microphone between you, and then we have these microphones to roam the audience, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So I'm not really sure why the big chair is up there, but I'm going to put it.
I was asked to put a chair up.
Let's get another armchair.
I like my comfort here. This is good.
And I don't think we need the giant one up there. I'm sorry, Carolyn.
Oh, it's okay, girl.
Yeah, okay. So why don't we have the two of you in these chairs? And we'll have you. I know. I think we're gonna. Yeah.
This one comes out.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sorry, it's sort of here. Oh, do we want it like that?
All right.
Okay. All right, thanks for everyone's patience. Is that comfortable? Again, we're sorry, we're not pros at this.
It's all right. This is good.
You take the mic away, Liz.
No, we're gonna just pass it back and
Does
forth.
that work?
I think she needs her chair a little closer so the mic will reach.
Okay, let's do that.
Chorus, okay.
You got it? Great. Okay. All right, question. Okay, go for it, thanks.
So this is a hard one for you guys, but I'm really interested. You were talking about property taxes, and that is really, really critical. I want to know what both of you think about a state income tax. To me, that's what's fair.
Hi, thank you for that question. I have introduced a bill for a state income tax, I think every year since I've been down there. I believe that it is a fairer tax than what we have now. What we have now is the most unfair, regressive tax structure in the entire United States. We are #1, and that is not something I am proud of. So we need to redo it. Do I think we can do it now? No, but I have this campaign going on to try to get people to understand the tax system. And until people understand the tax system, we're not going to get any tax reform.
So there's no question that we have a high-tech economy and a sort of low-tech tax system, right? It doesn't work together. And our tax system, up until recently at least, has underfunded schools so that we can't produce our kids can't get the jobs that are coming here as easily as they should be. So we do need to revamp something. But let's be clear. Income tax was on the ballot in 2010. It failed by 64%. You cannot pass something like that and have it stay in law with that high level of unacceptance, right? So I don't see at this point how that's a viable option. So that's not, I'm more practical. I mean, I want to get something done, not just wage tilted windmills. So I think we need to look at, we have an amazing amount of tax loopholes we need to close. Boeing gets a tax break every time it wants, huge tax breaks. There's money there. We just need to find the political will and capital to address that.
Do you want us to answer back and forth, or do you want just questions?
We're gonna go to the next question.
Okay.
Margaret?
Just following up on that, what about an increase, how about a capital gains increase to the tax?
Capital gains works. Thank you. Yeah, okay, thanks. That would work. It would be I think, alignment with restoring the base of the property tax system, put stocks and bonds back into the property tax system. They were taken out in 1935, and then again in what was left in there was taken out in 1997. Senator Horn introduced it. He was leaving the next year. It passed, but not without a lot of Democratic dissension. Since that 97 tax loophole was passed, the amount of money that we pay for education from property taxes in ratio to our gross domestic product has just gone way, way down. We went from a fairly high funding of education down to very low. And I'm not sure that a capital gains tax by itself would be sufficient to be able to pay for that. Your personal income is composed of three parts. One is your wages, the other is your what's called intangible property. Everybody needs to understand what intangible property is, because the Constitution says all property, tangible and intangible, will be taxed at a uniform rate. But all intangible property has been taken out of the tax base. So there are a lot of people who should be paying taxes, property taxes, who are not. And we need to address that whole issue, I think, before we do much more. People simply do not understand the tax system.
So I think that's an interesting and very astute question, and I think we do need to look at that. As a city council member, I'm not sure if I said that I was a city council member here in Shoreline. We are limited by state law to the taxation authorities that were granted by the state legislature. So some people complain that we only rely on property taxes, sales taxes, etc., and I would say that's a very valid complaint. I've asked the legislature to help us with that, and we haven't got the help that we needed. So we are in a very progressive city with still a regressive taxation system. So, thank you for your question.
Okay, next question.
We're taking a stack, so if you hold your hand up, I'll
Yeah.
get your name and we'll get to you.
Hi, this is targeting Senator Chase. I'm confused and perplexed about Ruth Katie's decision to endorse her opponent. As another Democratic longtime colleague from this district, what's your perspective on why that is?
I have no idea. You should ask her
I
about.
would.
Yeah.
She, however, is not here. So I was hoping for your perspective.
I cannot answer for my seatmate. I really cannot. I think there's any number of reasons she may have, and I think that primary among one of the reasons is I'm very much a partisan for public education. She voted for charter schools. A teacher ran against her, and she blames me for that. I do know that's one of the reasons. But, you know, I believe in public education. I did not recruit somebody to run against her. That's what she thinks. I would assume that's all I know about.
Thank you.
Can I speak to that in a positive way? I just want to say what Ruth supports and what I support are high-quality early childhood education. You know, that's something that I talked about. I also support public schools. So I'm not going to go into any negativity, but I just want to say that you know, she wants me, and I will, you know, sort of carry the line in terms of fighting for kids. I'm not talking about expanding charter schools or anything. That's not the breadth of her work. I just don't think it's fair to say that. But because of my history in championing children's issues, I think that helped me earn her endorsement.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi there. I would like to direct this question to both of you. Right now, we're in a situation where people are in Washington State are either uninsured, underinsured, or paying way too much for their health care. I think that a lot of good came out of the Affordable Care Act, but there's been a lot of problems that have resulted, and now we have a tax plan that is virtually undercutting and undermining a lot of the good that was done. And so I would like each of you guys to comment on what you think about a single-payer healthcare system in Washington State, both from a equity standpoint, which I think you both can understand that that would be an equitable way to do things, but also from a financial standpoint for Washington State, because I think that this is really what we need to do while we're waiting for the country to get their act together.
So I'll take a try at this. I was happy to see the Affordable Care Act passed. I was highly disappointed there was not a public option. I think that it would have served in a very strange way. We talk about competition, right? Private sector companies competing against each other to lower costs. But I think that we have an imbalance in our pharmaceutical system and our medical system, that instead of competition driving down cost, there's enough sort of market capture by politicians working with these groups that there's an inequity. And so I think a public option would have actually driven down cost. We have a fiscally unsustainable medical system, and the Affordable Care Act was trying to fix that in the sort of broken way that it passed without one of those critical stools, pillars of the stool. Now Donald Trump is saying that you don't have the individual mandate is no longer applicable, and so I'm very afraid that financially there's not going to be the support for that system that we need. So I do think we need to bring that back. In the long run, we need to look at allowing people to buy into Medicare, again, to support the public option. We need to look at single payer. As a senator, I think it's my role to surround myself with the best staff and really study the issues. This is probably the most complicated set of issues that we're going to deal with in the legislature or in public policy. And it's my commitment to always become an expert before I vote on something. But my values are such that I believe we need to have equitable, accessible, affordable, and sustainable health care. And that's not where we're at now.
So what about single payer in Washington State, though?
I think we should look at that.
That's a great question. I introduced this last session a single-payer bill. It was modeled on the California bill. It received just about the same reception that the California bill received, but we have to put it out there. We had actually 4 single-payer bills this last session. We had hearings on them. The legislature mandated a study which will be on whether or not we could afford the single payer. It should be completed, I think, around December of this year. And so we can take a look at that. Certainly, I have also, I think I'm the only elected official that has endorsed 1600. I think 1600, the value of 1600 is that it, in normal language that people can understand, demonstrated how we could fund this program here in our state. There are a number of tax options that we have that could pay, and it would save our state about $9 billion a year. It is cost effective. There's no reason in the world why we're paying so much for drugs. Absolutely none whatsoever. And hopefully, ultimately, when we get, it's going to take a national fix for the final solution, I think. But my hope is that we will move the blue line from the West Coast to the East Coast, demonstrating that single payer will work. And we'll see what happens. I know we have it on. We have an initiative out there. I'm going around the state making speeches about this. Whether or not we will get sufficient numbers of signatures, we need about 300,000 signatures. I don't know that we will receive that, but as a teaching tool, as an example on how to expose this issue to people, I think it's an excellent move. So I hope you will all support 1600.
In the 32nd Legislative District, we have a state senator, Senator Chase, who I really feel fights for the middle-class person, which I'm a part of. She's the chair of a very powerful committee. She votes to support public schools, and being a former public school teacher, that's my concern.
she doesn't vote to give $10 million to charter schools like her seatmate Ruth Kagi did. So my question is, if we've got a gal who's fighting for us, why on earth would we change?
Well, I think after 17 years, you should be able to say that I've achieved some of these monumental bills that I've been working on, especially when you have a number of those years, a large number of those years in the majority, and we don't have that. So I think there's an issue of, let me put it this way, I have sought to work very, very hard to work cooperatively and build coalitions with my colleagues. I've passed many things on the city council, from funding for moving people off homelessness and affordable housing. We passed a plastic bag ban just to help the environment that I came up with and pushed. We shut down plans to pave Hamlin Parks, 4 acres of Hamlin Park, which is a terrible idea, and so on and so forth. And so there is a difference in style, and I think at this point there is time for a change, and I think I could move our issues more effectively, especially when we're fighting back against Donald Trump. We can't afford to just, stay put. Thank you.
What a great question. I appreciate what you said about me. I introduce a lot of really big message bills. People in the legislature have different specialties that they work on. Some tweak little portions of bills. So, if you change a couple of words in a bill, that counts as a bill. I'm not interested in that kind of thing. I'm interested in very important policy issues. I'm interested in turning this state around. Now, everybody passes just about the same number of bills. You can do a check on it. But what most people don't do is do the big bills. And I want to tell you about 2 really big bills. One is the future of work that we're working on right now. And the other is to establish a manufacturing innovation center, institute, because we have about 5 to 7 years to get ready for stupendous changes in our economy. We have automation coming. We have digitalization. We have a global economy. We have half the state with no internet. We have an unfair tax system. So you figure out, how do we get this to change? Even when we have Democrats in the governor's house, and we have Democrats in the House, and we have Democrats in the Senate, we still have the most regressive tax structure in the entire United States. I'm trying to change that. It is very hard. We have different factions in both the House and the Senate. On both sides of the aisle, the Republicans have the Tea Party. We've got the corporate Democrats. I call them the Wall Street Democrats. And then we have, they have a lot more schisms over there in the Republican Party, I think, than what we have. But it's much more difficult than you think, and I'd be happy to discuss this with you in detail.
All right, Elaine?
Thank you. I'm very concerned about some of the responses that Councilmember Salomon gave, and especially when it comes to trying to improve things. And he implied that trying to change our tax system to include an income tax of some form or change something is not what we should be doing, because that's what pie in the sky, not your words, but that was your implication. And that is extremely disturbing to me, because every time we make any progress in any country, in any city, is by trying. And if you don't try, you'll never get there. And so I really want to return to that issue of an income tax, in your opinion.
Well, that wasn't a question, and I answered
It
the
is.
question.
I'm asking you to state more about why you're opposed to discussion of an income tax.
Thank you, Elaine.
You don't choose to answer?
Do you want me to carry on about income tax?
Sure.
I believe in fairness. I believe in justice. I believe in a progressive tax structure in which rich people pay according to their ability as the same as poor people. I have the latest data. Poor people are paying 20% now of their meager income in taxes in this state. That is disgusting. 20%. They don't even have enough money for food, for paying their ever-increasing utility bills. We have to have tax reform. Every single one of us has to take responsibility for this because it's simply not fair. It is not just. There is an inequity here in this state, and we are responsible. I can't put it off on the Republicans anymore because the Democrats are in power. When the Democrats are in power, why don't we fix it? That's not a very popular position down there, just so you know.
And Jesse, you're not. One more question? Alicia? One more question.
Okay, so this is kind of circling back to healthcare. So my husband is self-employed. He runs a small business, and you really get screwed big time for healthcare when you are a small business owner, even though we don't make a lot. Thanks to the way that the tax code is written, we last year lost all of our insurance. I lost my insurance, and my 4-year-old lost his. And we're still going without insurance, and the bills have been really piling up. My question for both of you is, what do you plan to do right now about that issue and make it easier for little business owners like us to actually afford their health care?
So I think the state should subsidize that kind of, when we talk about healthcare, it's if you don't subsidize healthcare, well, let's say if you're young, so if you're 20, you might say, well, I'm healthy, why would I want to pay into healthcare? Doesn't make any sense for me. Well, you need to pay over time because of the cost of healthcare, such that when you become older or sick, or if you get something, God forbid you get cancer when you're young, that pool of money is there so that you can afford treatment. So I don't think it's any more inequitable than requiring everybody who drives to have car insurance. Basically what I'm saying is that we have taxed small businesses a lot in this state and under-subsidized health insurance for small business owners. It's a constituency that hasn't had enough attention, and I'm sorry for that. That is why I voted against the business and occupation tax here in Shoreline. I thought it was another regressive tax that would have fallen on businesses. I didn't support it, and I do think we should subsidize health care for small business owners so that they can afford it. That's how you become a more successful business, right? Is if your costs at the start aren't so high that you can't reinvest in what you're trying to do. Thank you.
So we have about 550,000 businesses in this state, of which about 450,000 are sole proprietors, small businesses. We also have about 99,000 businesses, which I call middle market businesses, when they have maybe 5 to 50 or so. And then we got the big boys, the global corporations, and we don't really have to worry about them. Our healthcare system that we currently has is theoretically administered through business. You get your health care through your business or your place of employment. That works well as long as all the small sole proprietors keep their mouths shut and nobody talks about it. And when you start talking about it, you say, okay, how do we have all of these 450,000 people out here who have hung up their shingle because maybe they lost their job or whatever reason. I used to be one of those, so I understand that. How do we provide the benefits that they need to have, especially when we know that the upcoming digitalization of our workforce is going to put even more people out of business. Robots are coming, folks. I mean, there's just no way to get around it. So I thought, okay, in the 30s, we had co-ops. And I've been talking with the Co-op Federation, and also there's another association called the Association for Micro Enterprises, and the Grange. Now, all three of these organizations are all over this state. We even have one in this district, Cedar Valley Grange, I think. I'm going to join it. Because what I'm trying to do is talk to these three organizations, getting them out of their silos, so they're talking to each other now, and to see if we can't go ahead and have a cooperative health kind of policy and a cooperative drug purchasing consortium. And we can, Group Health did it before. We can do it again. We can do it. So I welcome anybody who wants to work on this. Please go join the Grange, because it's coming down the pike. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bill.